Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to start Daniel. I know we've got two more left in the minor prophets, but we're going back to Daniel. Daniel spans the time of the captivity of the southern kingdom all the way into the Persian Empire there, because they took over from Babylon. On this chart that's up here on the screen, you can see where Daniel falls. You can see how he overlaps the Babylonian and the Persian empires. He was a teenager when he was taken, and this is the picture of the deportations from Israel. He was a teenager, as I've read, as young as even 13, when Nebuchadnezzar invaded the southern kingdom and took out the Jews to Babylon in their captivity. He went with them as the first deportation. I'm going to read a little bit about, we'll hear this in Daniel, but when Nebuchadnezzar invaded and took the first deportation, he took the best of the best. He took the best soldiers, he took the best legislators, scientists, whatever they had, he took the best, including young youths or teenagers who were the sharpest and the most physically fit and had the most potential. So when he invaded and took the first deportation out, took the cream of the crop. We'll see a little bit about that. Another picture we're going to see a few times is this prophecy that Daniel has. And at the head, the top of the statue is Nebuchadnezzar, Babylonians, and then as it goes down through the structure of the statue, we've got the Persians, we've got the Greeks, and then the Romans. So that's what this picture is. You'll see it a few times. You've already seen it in pastor's teaching. And this list is a list I've shown before of the kings. We see in the Babylonian section in the middle, you see Nebuchadnezzar. After Nebuchadnezzar was Nabonius, then Belshazzar. We're hearing about Belshazzar in a pastor's teaching. And then into Cyrus the Great in Persia. There were some others after Cyrus, but that's pretty much the span of where Daniel was. Under Nebuchadnezzar, he got a prominent position, and then he seemed to fall out of favor with the next king, but he came back into favor when he was able to interpret Belshazzar's, the handwriting on the wall. You've heard that before. So that's where we're going with this. All right. So to introduce this slowly, the book of Daniel has 12 chapters. The first 6 chapters are historical. These are things that happened to Daniel that he's writing about and telling us about. The next 6 chapters are prophetical, things to come, including fate of some of the nations, fate of the Jews, fate of like Babylon and Persia, and that's what that statue shows us. And that was a prophecy that Daniel had to show what's going to be happening. So in 605 BC, this is when Nebuchadnezzar first invaded Judah, the southern kingdom, took out the captives, and the rest of the Jews were followed in other deportations. But as I mentioned, Daniel was young, and he lived all the way through, well, not all the way through, but he lived to Cyrus the Great's kingdom in Persia. So he lived till he was about 90. Because remember, the Jews were in captivity for 70 years, and Daniel actually got to see them come back to the land. He didn't go back with them, but he was there when they were all able to be released to go back. So I've got a couple of things to point out. He was very devoted to the Jewish customs, for example, food. So we read in verse 5, it says, the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food. And as we continue on, we read down to verse 8, Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food. So in verse 9, he asked permission. In verse 9, we see God's grace, and we know God is in control. And God granted Daniel the favor of not having to eat that food. That food was sacrificed to Babylonian gods or idols, and a Jew would not eat that. And Daniel only wanted food that was cleansed or offered properly, Jewish type food. Little side note there, it's mostly vegetarian, and I have no idea how he lived just eating veggies, but he did. But his concern was, or the guard who was in charge of feeding these kids or these boys, was afraid they would shrink up and be scrawny, which normally will happen to a vegetarian, right? You got to have pizza or something like that. But they didn't, and when they did not, they were actually stronger and better looking after eating that. That's why they were allowed to continue to eat it. And so that was one of his principles that he stood by. He was given a place of prominence and responsibility under Nebuchadnezzar. And as I mentioned, after Nebuchadnezzar died, he seemed to fall from grace, but came back with, he was able to interpret Belshazzar's dream that he had there. He lived a long time in Babylon. I've mentioned that. And then again in Persia, he was still there. We saw the list of the kings that I just showed you, how he spanned that whole thing. And in this exile that the Jews had been taken away, you would think that once they were removed, that God was through with them. But we know from our readings and we know from other things that God was not through with the Jews, and he's not through with Daniel and his 4 friends. And this is a good message for all of us, that God is not done with us. Even though we fail, he's still there with us. Okay, verse 1 starts off with Jehoiakim. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem to besiege it. Jehoiakim was the king that was there during this invasion, and he's the same king who tore up or burned up Jeremiah's writings. Probably not the best king we ever saw, but that's what he did, and here we are with this invasion that's happening. In verse 7, the names of Daniel and his 3 friends are changed. We're going to see that. They're all changed to Babylonian names, and all these names have references to Babylonian gods. And so what Nebuchadnezzar was doing when he would take people captive is he would try to inculcate them into the Babylonian culture. And he would be able to brainwash them, so to speak. And these are young boys, remember. Brainwash them and then use them later in his kingdom, and have them be very profitable toward the Babylonian system and be able to service that really well. So that's what he was doing when he was changing the names there and trying to get them to eat the same food and so forth. Verse 21 is just another summary. It says, Daniel continued until the 1st year of Cyrus the king, and that would be Cyrus the Great. And as I mentioned, he was there at least, for the 70 years of the captivity, plus when he was a young teen. So he probably lived into his early 90s through all of this. And so before I get started, I want to read a little bit about the invasion, the deportation that Nebuchadnezzar had. If you want to turn with me, I'll be reading more than just a cute couple verses. It's 2 Kings 23. I'm going to start there. So 2 Kings 23. And I'm starting in verse 34. You can just listen if you don't want to turn there. But it says, verse 34 of 2 Kings 23, Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, son of Josiah, remember Josiah was one of the really good kings, in the place of Josiah his father. So Eliakim, who's Eliakim? That's a fellow that Pharaoh Necho in Egypt promoted to king of Judah. And as the verse continues, he changed his name to Jehoiakim. Well, that's who I just read about in verse 1 of Daniel, Jehoiakim. So Eliakim becomes Jehoiakim. And hey, there's another example of another king who is, because Egypt at the time had an influence over Judah. There's another example of changing names. So Pharaoh changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim, just as Nebuchadnezzar changes names of the people he takes on board. All right, to continue. So Jehoiakim gave silver and gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land in order to give money at the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land, each according to his valuation, to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zebadah, daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, then turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through his servants, the prophets. Skip down a little bit. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, became king in his place. Moving down through there a little bit further, at the time, in verse 10, at the time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went up to Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his captains and his officials. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. He carried out from there all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made the temple of the Lord, just as the Lord had said. You will hear that in Daniel 1, where Nebuchadnezzar not only takes the people, but he takes all the treasures when he invades and takes them off. Part of the reason you take the treasures out of the temple is to show that your God is better than their God, because you can capture all the stuff that was given to their God. So that's another reason he takes all that stuff. Then he led away into exile all Jerusalem and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and all the smiths. I mentioned that before. He takes the best of the best. All the men of valor in verse 16, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the smiths, 1,000. All the strong and fit for war, that's all the soldiers. And the king of Babylon brought these into exile to Babylon. So that includes Daniel and his friends and other teenagers who qualified. So, all right, so there we go. I am ready to read in Daniel chapter 1 now, and I'll start at verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. He brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the king of his officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family, and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered them to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated for 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials, that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid, my lord, the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who were your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king.